Hi everyone, I'm Michael Adams of the Jason Roberts Foundation, and I'm extremely happy to be hosting this forum, which is the first in a series.
Right.
We've got lots. Shall we start again? Right. Hi everyone, I'm Michael Adams of the Jason Roberts Foundation, and I'm extremely happy to be hosting this forum, which is the first in a series of 5 webinars brought to you by Brent Council addressing the important subject of climate change. This first webinar focuses on travel, and we address the question how transport is changing to beat climate change. To guide us through this important topic, I will be joined by several guests who will share insights into their particular areas of expertise. Before we get started, we have a short survey for you to take, which should appear on your screen. Please complete and submit as instructed. Don't worry, we're going to continue with the seminar so you can do it in the background. Before I introduce you to our guests, I'd like to invite Councillor Krupa, Sheth, lead member for the environment at Brent, to say a few words about the session and the climate change emergency in Brent. Councillor Sheth.
Thank you, Michael. I'm Councillor Krupa Sheth. I'm the Cabinet Member for Environment at Brent, and I oversee the Brent Climate Emergency Strategy. I just want to say a few words to briefly welcome everyone to the first in our Beginner's Guide to the Climate Emergency webinar series, and say a big thank you to all of you who are watching and taking an interest in this vital topic. The case for climate action has been around for years, but popular support is building by the month. What has made the difference is translating often quite complex scientific detail into TV shows, social media posts, and other formats people can relate to. Who doesn't remember watching Planet Earth and feeling inspired by nature, but also equally horrified by our impact on it? Every action we take individually matters. That includes every decision we take to get from A to B, no matter how short the journey. We have chosen the topic of travel as the first in the series because we know it is an important issue that matters to local people in Brent. In Brent, 22% of our direct carbon emissions come from transport. The Brent Climate Assembly rated this issue as the second most important priority to be tackled in the borough in the coming years. These webinars aim to educate and inform, because if armed with knowledge and information about the climate crisis, local people are more likely to feel empowered to take action. So I would very much encourage you to listen closely to the 4 brilliant speakers who have kindly given up the time to be here today, and engage with the content via the chat function, including any burning questions you may want to ask them. I hope you all feel inspired by the end of this session and you go away and start to take action, because no matter how big or small it may be, everything makes a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Councillor. Okay, let's move on to our guests. And our first guest is Professor Nick Tyler of UCL and co-investigator of Livable Cities, a project looking at how to engineer low-carbon UK cities. Nick, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael, and good evening, everybody. Very good to be here, and what a very exciting idea to have these webinars. I think it's really terrific. I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the sort of big picture things about transport and emissions in relation to climate change. So without any more ado, I'm going to move on. Here's to start off with, this is just a chart showing the modal split in London. So how people are travelling in different kinds of ways. And one of the things that you'll see there is in London, around about a third of the transport in London is by car. And about a little over half is either walking, rail or bus, with a small amount of taxi and bicycle and so on, and about 11% on underground. So that's the kind of split that London was before COVID. If we look at an example city, just a random other city in the world where I managed to find some comparative data, this is Hong Kong. Very, very different kind of city, but look how much walking there is in Hong Kong. That's because it's a very relatively compact city, so huge amounts of walking, lots of bus, bit of rail, bit of light rail and so on, and car is only 6%. A very, very different split of transport, and that has implications for carbon emissions in relation to transport. Transport typically is a large proportion of the total emissions that we have. Here is a picture of what happened in London last year in COVID. So the red line here is bus journeys and the blue line is tube journeys. And you can see the effect of COVID last March and what happened then and how it completely panned out and rose again a little bit until we're about, at the moment, roughly speaking, about half the number of trips by public transport now compared with before COVID. Here is what happens with the greenhouse gas emissions in the UK. Roughly speaking, you can see a kind of gradual, rather polite decline. The last figure on the right is the provisional figures for 2020, showing around about 400 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. That's kind of greenhouse gases, quite a lot. This is another graph that is showing you the carbon dioxide emissions for terrestrial transport. So that's cars, trains, and so on, trucks. And again, you can see that it's sitting at around about 30 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions until last year, when it plummeted to about 16 or so during COVID because people were not traveling, and it's kind of climbed up a bit since then. So you can see that there's an awful lot of these emissions around, and transport is actually a very important element of that. What we're looking at is that the London figure of transport is around about 4.6% of UK emissions before COVID, and around 8% of UK emissions after COVID. So it is a significant proportion of the whole of the UK emissions is actually happening in London. So we desperately need to do something about this. We're talking about sustainable transport. I mean, I would, if I wanted to be a little bit controversial, I'd say actually sustainable transport doesn't exist. I think what we're really looking at here is if we need to move things around, it's going to cost us energy. And if we're moving, the more things we move, the more energy it's going to cost. The more energy we use, the more emissions we're going to create. That is true for, obviously, for fossil fuel vehicles like diesel, but it's also true actually for electric vehicles. So we think that electric vehicles are going to be good for us, but actually the electricity has to be generated somewhere. And that means it is actually generating emissions somewhere. And in this country, it also means that electric vehicles, as all other vehicles do, emit other things into the atmosphere as part of the greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants. So you end up with large amounts of particulates. And electric vehicles actually emit more particulates than fossil fuel cars because they're slightly heavier. And so just simply converting to electricity for a car and just doing the same journeys doesn't actually crack the problem. So I think I like to think a bit more in terms of mobility rather than transport. Transport is kind of how you do movement. Mobility is about all the movement that we actually need. And that is defined by the way in which we wish to live. So where you are and where things are implies the journeys that you have to make to go and see them. So we're working much more around the basis of a neighborhood, where we think of a neighborhood as an area within which you can do what you want to do pretty much within easy reach. So what do you need to have? The kind of question that we've asked in various cities around the world is, what do you need to have within easy daily reach? So things like schools, things like the kind of daily shopping, the bread, the rice, the kind of stuff you need to buy every day. You also need to have good access to things like green space, including playgrounds for children, community centres for the whole community, to make sure that we are able to age in place and we can generate those community bases of sociality about how we talk and how we converse with each other, how we create those streets and safe places, how you actually get your transport and connectivity so that you can move around your neighborhood, but also move out of the neighborhood for other things if they're not within your neighborhood. And that kind of concept you'll hear about, some people talking about the 15-minute city like Paris or the 20-minute city like Melbourne. But personally, I think that's a wrong approach. I think this is all much more about a sort of neighborly city, a neighborly neighborhood. And we think about this, getting the neighborhood right and then build the borough and the city and so on out of that neighborhood, and making sure that way that we can actually reduce the need for actual mechanical motorized travel. Because if we do that, we can actually increase our mobility. We can make things more available to us more of the time, and yet decrease the mechanized movement that creates all those emissions. And that really is the trick. So what would be my trips to a place like Brent? I think I would say the basic tip would be think local, very local. Think people, think mobility and not movement. And when I say local, I mean that kind of neighborhood. A neighborhood is probably around about 100 households, maybe the length of a smallish street. And then think how they communicate with the next streets and how they communicate with the neighborhoods and so on. And to do that in those kind of areas, we need to think about where are those activities and facilities that people want, so that they can do more locally by choice, not because they have to, but because they want to. The second thing is to start from the small neighborhood where you can do many things on foot, or in taking into account the people who have accessibility and mobility problems. It's reachable by them as well. And then you think upwards from there towards the larger community areas, the borough, the city, and so on. And instead of thinking from the top down. And so that leads you to the third one, is to whatever the transport is, it should be available to everybody. It means rethinking what we want public transport to do so that all of our community's desires can be met without pollution. And in that way, you can actually cut those transport emissions back into a level which means that we have better quality of air, better quality of life, better health for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Nick. Okay, we are moving on to our next guest, and of course you're going to get a chance, the public, to ask any questions to all of our experts. So, but we'll go through the presentations first. And I'm pleased to have with us Caroline Axtell, community organiser, car-free London campaigner, and founder of Joyriders. Over to you, Caroline.
I'm just going to share my screen. Everybody see that all right?
Yeah.
Great. So, yeah, I'm Carolyn Axtell, and I'm Car-Free London campaigner for climate action charity Possible. Possible is a national charity, but we also do quite a bit of work in London, and the Car-Free campaign is very much a grassroots campaign. So we're all about positive solutions to the climate emergency, empowering people to make change, and our vision is of a low-carbon Britain which is built by and for everybody. So we have other projects like solar-powered trains, heat pumps in parks, and transport is just one of our areas. So I'm going to talk a bit about the Car-Free London campaign and how people in Brent can get involved, and how travel is changing in London and how it could look after lockdown. So just following on from a lot of the things that Nick's talked about there, which that was a really interesting presentation, I think a lot of food for thought. We know that cars are a problem in London, and that our streets are dominated by cars. We've just seen, 32% of transport is by car in London, and we know that our streets weren't built to accommodate this volume of traffic, and it's actually increased motorised traffic over the last 10 years on residential roads. So we know that this is obviously not sustainable. We already know, as Councillor Sheth mentioned at the beginning, that greenhouse gas emissions, cars are a large contributor to that. And I'm just going to run through a few other reasons why cars are a problem, not just carbon emissions. We know that there were 4,000 serious injuries in 2019 and 125 fatalities on London's roads from cars. And Nick also talked a little bit about particulate matter. So that's what's produced from the brake and tyre wear. And as Nick pointed out, electric vehicles actually produce more. So you can see here in the area highlighted in red how severe that is in and around London. And so those little tiny particulates from the brake and tyre wear of cars actually can enter our hearts, our lungs, our brains, can affect fetuses in pregnant women, and obviously have a negative impact on our health. The inactivity crisis is also a big factor. So obviously car travel is very sedentary. The inactivity crisis has increased during lockdown, and we actually need to redesign physical activity back into our lives. And of course, travelling in a more active way is the way that we can do that. When I say active travel, I mean cycling, walking, scooting, and even using public transport, because obviously part of that is active. Another issue is the amount of space which is given over to parked cars in London, which is actually more than the amount of parkland in London. And we know that the average car is actually parked for 95% of the time. So there's a vast amount of public land there which is being given over to parked cars. And this nice little GIF here shows what some of those parking spaces could be used for. We know that there's not enough green space in London, that there's less than half the amount of green space we need for the amount of population. And social equity is also a really important aspect of our campaign. We know that the poorest households in London, many of them don't own a car. We can see here, looking at Brent, only about half the households own a car. But it's people that don't have cars that are often suffering the harms of cars the most, the kind of harms we've talked about from other people driving through their neighbourhoods. Social isolation is also a really important one. A number of studies over the years have shown that if you live on a street with heavier traffic, then you have less interaction with other people, less acquaintances, less opportunity to talk to your neighbours, you're less likely to know your neighbours. And up at the top here, if you live on a street with less traffic, all of those benefits increase. And of course, congestion. And making a point again about electric vehicles, if you were to take all of those cars in gridlock on the North Circular and replace them from petrol and diesel to electric vehicles, you're still not going to change the problem of the congestion. So what are some of the alternatives to help us move away from private car ownership, which is what we're seeking to do with the Car Free London campaign, to reduce our dependency on private car ownership? So the Mayor of London, through the Greater London Authority and individual councils, can make it easier for people to choose healthier alternatives, because obviously those choices that we make are not within a vacuum. So we need increased support for cycling and walking, and that needs to be improvements to infrastructure. There also needs to be more emphasis on cycle training, led rise, and an improved environment to make people feel more able to cycle, including those softer measures, and also making people feel safer, so they're more likely to walk. We've also got shared mobility, car share clubs, bike hire schemes. We know that the e-scooter trials are going to be starting in London next month, and we need better and more affordable public transport, and for people to feel safe to return to public transport, because as we've already seen, obviously the numbers are lower than they were pre-COVID. And we need more emphasis on 20 mile per hour zones, more controlled parking, and more traffic reduction measures to help people to choose other alternatives. I'm going to tell you a little bit now about the Car Free London campaign and what that is. We've also got Car Free Cities campaigns in Bristol and Leeds and Birmingham as well. So one aspect of our campaign is parklets. A parklet is where you take a parking space and use it for social community benefit that benefits a lot of different people. And a number of these have sprung up over London recently, where people have built them outside their own houses, And a lot of the feedback has been that it's been really helpful for people with reduced mobility who've said that previously they couldn't actually walk to their local shops because it was too far for them to walk without being able to stop for a rest because of the lack of public seating. So that's just one positive thing about parklets. But there are lots of things that you can do with a parklet, as you can see here. And yeah, we're going to be encouraging councils to set up their own parklet permit process so that people can apply for a parklet permit in the way they would apply for a car park permit for their car, and use that space outside their house, because obviously they've got an equal right to use it. We're also going to be doing a traffic survey about traffic filters, and that's not focused on the recent low traffic neighbourhoods that have been put in sort of over the last year, looking at those historic traffic filters where there are sometimes bollards at the end of a street, or a fire gate where it's been blocked off to through traffic, motor traffic, for a number of years. So we're going to be going around doing a door knocking survey, asking people how they feel about that and whether they would like those bollards removed and have the traffic to flow freely through their street again or not. And we also hope to harvest some positive case studies of people who oppose the more recent low traffic neighbourhoods, or I think they're called healthy neighbourhoods in Brent, and where people have actually changed their mind about that and discovered that they do like the benefits of it, which we know has happened a lot in Waltham Forest, which is my home borough. We're also going to be installing traffic counters in people's homes where they want to make the case for traffic calming measures on their street if they've got very heavy traffic. So it's based on a little Raspberry Pi camera that sits in your window and measures all the different types of traffic going past. And we're going to be doing some work around car-free living, so supporting car-free living, selecting 3 people in each city and following their journeys into going car-free and how they find it. So that's going to include some trials of cargo bikes and adapted bikes for disabled people. So really encouraging people to, rather than sort of upgrade their car and swap their car for a ULEZ compliant vehicle with the introduction of the new ultra low emission zone expansion, to actually give car-free living a go. And we want to do a little bit of research there to see what are the barriers that are preventing people from going car-free and what are the solutions. We've also got future filling stations, which is a project where we want to look at repurposing petrol stations. We want to map the petrol stations in the city, which a lot of which of course will become obsolete with time. They'll be redundant once petrol cars are phased out, and we want to start a conversation about how that land is going to be used. Rather than having lots of electric vehicle charging stations or car washes, what uses could we have that would better serve the community? And we've got here a book club at Hyde Park in Leeds, which is on an old petrol station site. So we'll be doing some community visioning workshops in schools and with communities, and hoping to register some petrol stations of assets as assets of community value, to actually look at what those could become in future. So in terms of how residents in Brent can get involved with the campaign, you can sign up to our mailing list, and I can pop the link for that in the chat if I can do that. If you sign up to our mailing list, you'll get an invitation to join our Slack community, which is a platform where we can share ideas, and we very much want to get your ideas to input into the campaign. You can volunteer as a community listener to carry out that survey that I mentioned, and that will be also a social event where there'll be expenses and people will be able to go and have a coffee and a chat at the end of it. You can create your own parklet for Car Free Day in September, and that could be as simple as just having a table and a few chairs in a parking space outside your house, have a chat with your neighbours. You can have a go at swapping your car for a cargo bike or adapted bike in the autumn as part of the Car Free Living project. And like I say, we're looking for people whose experience we can actually document of how easy or how difficult they find it going car free. And there's many ways that you can involve your community group or school in the programme. Okay. And just to finish, in terms of practical tips on going car free, you can also book free cycle training, which is available in any London borough, including in Brent. You can join a joyride to build your confidence. Vieve's going to be talking a bit more about joyriders. Find a buddy to ride with. You could join a local walking group. You could join a car share club for those journeys where you do need to use a car. And there's also a great blog with more tips about car-free living, which I'm also going to pop in the chat. And that brings me to the end.
Thank
I'm
you.
obviously happy to take any questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Thank you very much. And of course, as was said to everybody, could you load up your questions that you may have? We will be fielding those after we finish our presentations. Okay, moving on. We are now going to welcome Mark to the stage. It's Mark Falcon, Chair of Clean Air for Brent, a local coalition raising awareness about air pollution. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Michael. I'm struggling to share my screen.
Okay. They've just made you a co-host, I believe, so that might have been the problem.
That's great. Thanks. Thanks again, Michael. So I'm Mark Falcon. Clean Air for Brent is a local volunteer campaign group, and we work closely with Brent Council on developing the climate change, climate emergency strategy and air quality strategy. Now, this is a beginner's guide on travel and the climate emergency. So I want to cover some of the basic big topics. The first is, what is carbon and why does it matter? This is something we probably all learned at primary school, but have since forgotten. All living things are made from carbon and water. And carbon is constantly in motion between the atmosphere, the earth, the ocean, and living beings, and that's called the carbon cycle. Every time we breathe, we emit carbon dioxide, and so do all plants and animals. At the same time, plants take in carbon dioxide, by photosynthesis. That's how they grow. And when plants and animals die, plus what goes to the sewage works, that carbon goes back to the earth, and some of it becomes fossils, or coal, oil, and gas. And this has happened for the last 4 billion years. But for the last 200 years, we've dug up those fossil fuels, and put them straight back into the air. So why does that matter? Well, it matters because too much carbon in the atmosphere means global warming. It's because the atmosphere is like a greenhouse. That's what keeps us warm at night. But too much carbon is like closing all the doors and the windows. It gets too hot. That's why it's called the greenhouse effect. And this threatens our existence. David Attenborough says, a radical change in the level of the atmospheric carbon was a feature of the 5 mass extinctions in Earth's history, and a major factor in the most comprehensive annihilation of all species, the Permian extinction, almost all species, 250 years ago. So what about transport? Now, here are the main sources of greenhouse gases globally. Cement, farming, heating, iron and steel, manufacturing, and transport. And transport includes road, rail, air and sea, but road is by far the largest, 7 times that of shipping. And this number for transport is only the fuel. It doesn't include making vehicles, which is a big chunk of the iron and steel and the manufacturing. So what about cars? Now this shows the emissions, the lifetime emissions from different types of car. A small car, Citroen C1, medium car, Ford Focus, and a Range Rover, a large SUV. And you can see these huge differences in emissions. And this is mainly due to the weight of the vehicles. It takes a lot more carbon to build them and a lot more fuel to drive them. But by comparison, the global average carbon emissions per capita are 5 tons a year. So if I drive a Range Rover for 10 years, the average life, That's 5 tonnes a year. That's my entire share of global emissions just driving a car, without including anything else. But, so what's the link to air pollution? Well, vehicles don't just emit carbon, but also air pollution as well. Now here's a very recent poster from the Mayor of London, Transport for London. And the main pollutants from the air pollutants are nitrogen dioxide, NOx, and small particulates, which are Carolyn and Nick have already mentioned. They're both leading causes of respiratory illnesses, asthma, lung cancer, as well as Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease. Now, you might be aware of the recent inquest into the death of a 9-year-old girl who lived near the South Circular, Ella Kissy Deborah. Her death was recorded as severe asthma and respiratory failure caused by air pollution, in particular traffic emissions, combined with lack of public awareness. And the coroner has called for legally binding targets to address air pollution, to which the government is due to respond next month. Now here's an example of another poster, but lack of awareness is much of the problem. The car industry spends $2 billion on advertising in the UK last year and $40 billion globally, mostly dominated by SUVs. It's difficult for public health messaging to compete with that. Because just because you can't see the pollution doesn't mean to say it can't kill you. But what about electric cars? Well, there's a lot of marketing saying they're zero emission, but this is wrong on multiple counts. First, most electric cars are powered by fossil fuels. In the UK, mostly gas. In the US, mostly coal. The Tesla has been called really a coal-powered car. Worse than petrol. Second, electric cars, as Nick has mentioned, are actually a lot heavier than the equivalent. So look at this example here. A Renault Zoe, which looks like a small car, is about twice as heavier than the equivalent petrol car. And over the lifetime, it emits more carbon than Citroën C1. The second, Toyota Prius, who pioneered hybrids, this car is actually half the emissions of a Range Rover. And that's because often hybrids or plug-in hybrids, they work well if you plug them in, but a lot of people have actually just used them as a petrol car. So you're carrying around a needless battery and using fossil fuels in any event. Now, thirdly, I think as also mentioned already, tyres are a huge source of air pollution. And this is because over the life of a tyre, almost a third is shed through wear. And this increases, obviously, the weight of the vehicle. And it's estimated that 3/4 of the emissions from particulates are actually are as a result chiefly of tyres. And these also end up ultimately in the sea and contribute hugely to marine pollution. So what can be done? Now, we've already heard quite a bit, but one of the big responses to the pandemic has been to promote active travel, cycling and walking, so that everyone and not just drivers can travel safely, and to reduce air pollution and obesity, both directly linked to COVID-19. Now, a recent study by the Mayor of London estimates that almost or more than half of car journeys in London could be made by walking or cycling. And that's on the basis of walking journeys of less than a mile and a half. That's 2 million trips a day, driven by car during daylight hours, without luggage, without carrying a child, an infant, not an elderly person, or somebody with a mobility, could be done by walking rather than by car. 3 million by cycling. That's journeys less than 5 miles. And recent studies from other cities, Nick highlighted Hong Kong, but other cities in Europe show sort of similar reductions or greater reductions are possible in car use. So here's a summary of how personal transport has to change in the next 10 years at most. It's a shift from domination by cars to co-modal, greater use of public transport, greater use of active travel, of changing cars from large and heavy to being the right size, to being appropriate to their use because of the impact of that. It's shifting to electric, but making sure that that electric is powered by renewable sources and also making the batteries a lot lighter. And it's shifting from owning cars to sharing cars because as I think Nick highlighted, 90% of the time the car is spent parked on the street doing nothing. Whereas car sharing schemes like Zipcar, every shared car takes about 10 cars off the road because it's used much more efficiently, like an Uber as well. It's being used all the time. So lastly, I'd like to recommend a good book, which is a source of some of my figures, How Bad Are Bananas by Mike Berners-Lee. And this tells you the carbon footprint of everything from sending an email, eating a banana, to starting a war. And that's good food for thought. So hand you back to Michael.
Thank you very, very much there, Mark. Okay, we are now going to introduce our final guest before we get into the Q&A session, and that is Vieve Ford, Director of Joyriders, a London-based organisation empowering women through cycling. Vieve, welcome.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you. Just sharing my screen there. Okay. Hi, everyone, and thanks to all the previous speakers. Lots of food for thought. So I'm here to talk about something that lots of you, hopefully, can do now, and that is riding a bike more often. So first of all, a little bit about Joyriders. We started about 4 years ago, and actually Carolyn, as I think has been mentioned before, is our founder, and she started just by talking to women who were on the school run and going for a ride. Isn't that great? In the first year, they went riding with a few hundred, and it grew pretty fast. And by the time 2019 came, Joyriders was named London Sports Club of the Year. We became a social enterprise at the start of last year, and then, of course, we had to reinvent ourselves. But we've done that, and we expanded our reach massively during last year by going online very quickly and doing a lot of online stuff. And now we're running rides right across London, just started in Oxford, about to start in Manchester, Cambridge and Newcastle. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the women who come on our rides. And we do specifically aim at getting women to come on rides because 70% of all the regular riders in Britain are men. So we really want to break down the barriers that are preventing women from riding. 75% of the women who came on our rides said before coming on Joyrides they never rode a bike. But after starting to ride with Joyriders, 30% of them said, I now ride every day. And a further 50% said they rode at least once a week. So that's a massive change in behaviour. Really, really huge. 30% of women who don't ride at the moment say they would like to ride. In the UK, though, riding a bike is the modal choice for only 2% of people. In Hungary, it's 22%. In the Netherlands, unsurprising, 27%. In Denmark, 16%. And I can guarantee you, riding a bike is faster, cheaper, healthier, less stressful and more fun than driving a car in any city on earth, and regardless of infrastructure. I promise you. So why do so many women choose not to ride? So these are some of the reasons that are given. Half of the women who are asked say the roads are too dangerous, or they lack the confidence. They don't know what the routes might be. They haven't got a bike, big one. They haven't got anyone to cycle with. They're concerned about what other people will say. They're self-conscious about it. They don't think they have the right clothes. I promise you, you don't need Lycra. It's not a requirement. I know plenty of women who cycle in dresses and high heels. So, you know, do not be concerned about these things. We went online, we grew a lot. Therefore, we started riding right around the country. And as a result of all of the work that we've done over the past 4 years, people say to us these things. It's more than riding. It's much more than riding. It's feeling more connected in the community. It's meeting women from different backgrounds. It's encouraging their families and friends to ride a bike. And not only do women become more confident riding a bike, they become more confident in other parts of their life. And for many women, that's a revelation. The most common word I hear when women describe the feeling of riding a bike is freedom. And the second most common word I hear is I feel more independent than ever before. So these are things that women are taught not to be from when they're about a foot high. So this is a wonderful, wonderful revelation for women. Really couldn't stress how much it makes a difference. When women started joyriding, a quarter of them said they could cycle but couldn't control the bike completely. But after coming on joyrides, 70% said they either could ride on the roads, maybe with not 100% confidence, or they were confident, regular, on-road cyclists. I see a lot of people talking about infrastructure. Yes, infrastructure is important, especially to get started. But I promise you, once you gain that confidence, once you start coming on rides, led rides, and see how easy it is to ride in a safe position, which 80% of cyclists out there do not do. I promise you that too. I'm a cycling instructor. I watch them. It makes it really, you can ride, and you can ride on all the roads in London. So, in Brent, we have 2 rides coming up. The first, they're both for beginners. And when I talk about beginners, I mean if you've only learned to ride in the last 2 weeks, you can probably come on one of these rides. As long as you can pedal, steer your bike, and use your brakes, you can come on these rides. They're not long, they're not fast, you can wear anything you like, and they're available for you. So the first one is on the 2nd of June. There will be bikes available to borrow for both of these if you don't own a bike. And the second one is on the 10th of June. So now's your opportunity to start riding with Joyriders. And we will be riding regularly in Brent from now on. Okay. For those of you who already ride a bike, you might like to volunteer with us. Got to get a pitch in somewhere. If you're passionate about helping other women to start riding a bike, if you've got a bike and a reasonable level of riding experience, then get in touch with me and I can tell you more about coming and volunteering with Joyriders. And there's a bit of information on how to get in touch with us. The best way to find out about our rides is to follow us on Eventbrite. We have lots of stuff on our YouTube channel, everything from route videos, learning to ride videos, information about riding, information about cycle navigation, all sorts of stuff. And we're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, I haven't got there, and online. So we look forward to welcoming you very soon on one of our rides in Brent. Thanks very much, and I will stop there, and any questions, please do put them forward.
Okay, thank you very, very much there, Vieve. Right, we've reached that point where we are going to move into questions and answers. But just before that, you were asked to take a survey. Tom, anything that we should pick up from the survey that was conducted at the start of the session?
Thanks, Michael. So the first question was, how often do you think about the climate emergency? And so we had options through from every day down to I never really think about it. And we've clearly got some avid environmentalists watching us at the moment. So the biggest by a mile was 74% think about the climate emergency every day, which is great, which is brilliant. So really pleased and quite surprised actually to see that as the result. The second highest was weekly, which is 21%. And then the third was I never really think about it, which was 5%. So those are obviously 5% we need to convert. The second was how well do you understand what actions you can take to contribute to tackling the climate emergency? Again, thankfully, we have 0% for people who know nothing at all and 0% for people that know very little. The biggest answers were 45% of I have a good understanding of the actions I can take, and 42%, slightly underneath that, is I have some knowledge of the actions I can take. The third highest was 13%, a very detailed understanding. So the majority of the people on the call have a good understanding or some knowledge of the actions that they can take to tackle the climate emergency. Third question was, how well do you feel you understand the link between modes of transport, carbon emissions and the climate emergency? Again, thankfully, 0% knew nothing at all. So clearly got, as I say, quite a knowledgeable group watching us. 3% was I know very little. The highest again was I have some knowledge of this and I have a good understanding of this at 37% and 39%. And again, similarly, 21% have a very detailed understanding. And the final one was what modes of transport do you currently regularly use? And that was open to as many, you can click as many as you want. And 85% by the biggest margin was walking. So I will leave that to, leave this to the panel to think about. The second highest was train or tube. The next was 49% watching us was cycling, 46% take the bus, and in a minority you've got 31% car or diesel and 10% car, hybrid or electric. So again, kind of in the realms that we want people to go in kind of sustainable modes winning out with the people watching, but 30% still taking diesel or petrol. And that was it for now.
Okay, thank you very much. I know we're going to be doing a short survey after, but for now, that's some very, very interesting results. Okay, we're going to go over to Q&A. I'm going to come back to you in a minute, Tom, to ask for some of the questions, but I have actually got a question to get the ball rolling. And I'm putting on my other hat, which is as a human behaviour specialist, because I think one of the things that's come across throughout all the presentations is this shift in mindset, which needs to take place, because we've grown up in societies that are used to convenience. Everybody's telling you that convenience is good, and very often that convenience comes at a cost. So Nick, how have you seen, people who are used to driving their cars? We're sending a different message now, that the human psyche will think that something's been taken away from them. And obviously that's not the case. It's what we've got to gain. In terms of your research, have you dipped on that side of it to find out the psyche of what people think they may be losing out on?
Yeah. Thanks very much, Michael. I think this is a really, really important point, because in the world of transport, we think of cars as a mode of transport, but actually cars are much more important to people as an image of status. Yeah. What car you drive, and this is true all over the world, what car you drive is kind of important. And so if you say to somebody, well, you can't use this thing, then it's not just that you're stopping them from using the car as a mode of transport, you're actually you're cutting out some piece of what they perceive to be their status. So it means that the behavior change job is a very, very different beast from the one that's just simply about the logic of doing it by car because it's cheaper or more expensive or whatever. So we have to turn the message around a lot more and talk much more around, actually, fine, have your car, that's absolutely perfect. It's just that you think very hard about how you use it. In Germany, for example, car ownership is way higher than it is in the UK, miles higher than it is in the UK. But the car use is like 50%.
Wow.
And that's because they are much, much more sensitive to using public transport for the day-to-day, going to work and doing all the sort of ordinary things. And where they use their car is at the weekend or going on long journeys for whatever reason. And so the difference between ownership and use is really, really strong there. And there are other countries where you'll find that. And I think, in a sense, enabling the conversation to become more mature about the use of the car, which can extend to not using a car, but how are you using your car in the best way for the environment? I think getting the language around that enables you to deal, at least to some extent, with that status problem.
Okay, that's good. Carolyn, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, I pose the same question to you, because obviously I can see how progressive what you're doing is, but again, how do you deal with that dilemma of people thinking they're having something taken away?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, while Nick was talking, I was thinking about, the research to suggest that the status of a car is particularly important for, people that live in multi-generational households. So in some ethnic communities, people may not have a lot of personal space. They may not even have their own bedroom. They may not be able to afford to move out, or there may be cultural reasons why they can't move out, but their private space is their car. It's like their little room on wheels. So there are so many different kind of cultural reasons why people are attached to their cars. But I think what we want to get across to people is that it's not having something taken away from you. It's actually really liberating. I mean, I was really liberated when I got rid of my car. The amount of stress that comes with owning a car, parking tickets, tax, insurance, it's always costing you money. The stress of trying to find a parking space. It's actually, I think it can actually be very liberating. And I'm speaking as someone with 3 children, so, I think you have to look at each person's situation. What are the normal journeys that they're doing? What shifts? Okay, lots of people think, well, I need my car because I've got to get to I can't do my supermarket shop without it. Well, actually, you could go to the supermarket twice a week, and you can fit quite a lot in the shopping trolley or in the panniers of your bike. You can shop more locally. There are lots of solutions, and I think it's just looking at each person as a sort of individual case study and finding out what support they need. And I think also we've got a campaign called Badvertising, which is about banning high carbon advertising, and one of those is SUVs. We know that advertising does make a huge difference, and it reinforces all of these ideas about driving out on the open road. When we know that most SUVs are actually sold in urban areas, and we've seen a lot of the problems with vehicles through Mark's presentation. So I think banning advertising of these sort of products would help with associations with status. Okay.
Mark, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, thanks, Michael. I completely agree with what Carolyn and Nick said. A good analogy is the pandemic. Something was taken away from us, our freedom, but for a very important public health reason. And that's why this kind of event is so important, and absolutely commend Brent and other boroughs should be doing the same, but it's got to be led by the government. That if people understand and realise the impact that certain behaviours are having, like making car journeys when they could use alternative transport, then it won't feel like so much has been taken away from them, because it will feel like they are contributing to solving the problem. But at the same time, I'm speaking partly as an economist as well, that pricing has to come in as well. If you take that book that I mentioned about how much carbon is in everything, most people don't know, just don't know the impact of different choices. But if it's priced so that things which have a high carbon content like SUVs or like Vieve, then that will change people's behaviour and also encourage alternatives. There's got to be a mix. It's got to be led by the information and the awareness, but also letting people have a choice, but also trying to steer them in the right direction.
Okay, Vieve, I think I was engaged by your energy and about the passion you have for riding bikes, and I think that's in terms of when you're on that trail of converting people. How important is that?
I think that's really crucial, and having a passion for it, but knowing the figures and being able to convince people is really important. And you can convince them with figures, but if I can get people to just come on one ride, they'll be convinced. Mm-hmm. It doesn't take much. They've just got to try it once. Because in all honesty, if you can get people to come on a ride who haven't ridden, and these are the people we're aiming at. It's not people who are already cycling and doing it. They know how great it is. They know it's faster than driving a car. They know it's cheaper. They know it's healthier. They know all that stuff. Okay, what we're trying to do is show people who think that it's not faster, that it's not healthier, that it's not fun, that it's not less stressful than driving a car, that actually it is. I love nothing more than passing a great line of traffic with one person sitting in every vehicle, which is what I do pretty much every day. And guess what? All of those people are stressed out. They're sitting there thinking, why has it taken me so long to drive this 1 mile journey? Well, guess what? It's because you're in your car.
Okay.
And that's the passion we need to get over to people and get them to understand they are the traffic. They are the pollution.
So basically we need, it's like anything else. We need, it's get your bike out, and it's almost creating those meet-up situations in campaigns that starts to generate a groundswell.
Absolutely.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, Tom, please, questions.
Okay, I will just move quickly on to, there was quite a few questions about air pollution and air quality. So a couple which have come in on that are saying that they're concerned about schools near polluted roads. Can we do anything about that? And also, how do we best communicate to people about the effects of cars, of air quality from cars? If people knew the effects on young people, they wouldn't drive petrol. If anyone's got any thoughts on the air quality angle.
Okay, does anyone want to particularly pick up on that, or shall I pick on somebody? Okay, there we go, Mark.
Yeah, well, that's partly directed to us on clean air, but air pollution is a huge health impact on schools. There's been a program of the school streets of closing streets outside schools during drop-off times and collection times, and those that makes a big difference to discourage people from driving their kids to school. But in order to reduce the pollution, it's got to be part of the same reducing traffic overall, and so there does need to be a lot of awareness raising, because that's a lot of the problem. Is there's just not that awareness of pollution, and because it's not visible, people say, well, I don't. They deny its existence. So it's been good, the campaigns, those posters that I showed from TfL, from charities like the British Heart Foundation, but there needs to be a lot more of that. And the NHS needs to do a lot as well. The NHS does have a huge budget for advertising. You've seen all of that spent on the pandemic. There could be a lot more for air pollution. Air pollution is the biggest environmental threat to health in the UK. Globally, it's one of the biggest causes of health and illness. So really public awareness raising is probably the biggest thing, because that will encourage people to change their behaviour, to say, well, let's get my bike out.
Now, in respect of public awareness, I mean, there was the recent story about the young girl who died, the asthma young girl who died with the pollution from the South Circular. Again, those things need to be shared in a much more general way, because it was almost a back page story instead of really emphasising, because it was from what my understanding, it was a big decision that the courts made there. And I don't know, are you guys using that to get your message across at all?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, you know, the mother of the girl who died has been a tireless campaigner. She's done some amazing things. She herself was a teacher. She's gone out on the campaign trail, but she needs to get probably more politicians. I mean, it's also celebrities. I mean, others have mentioned social media. Councillor Sheth mentioned social media at the start. What could really make a difference is getting celebrities to start communicating these kind of messages on Instagram, on TikTok, on social media platforms, because that's what changes people's attitudes and behaviours.
I think you make a very, very good point. I mean, we've got, particularly in Brent, there are quite a few celebrities who have come from Brent, are generated Brent, and so messages coming from these people about these types of lifestyle changes is very, very, very important. So it's a point well made. Tom, any more in the forum?
Yes. So there are, I would say, a couple of questions about EVs we can cover, and quite a few challenges to the council as well, so which I think we could potentially cover in a two-pronged way. So firstly, there's a question directly for Nick, which is how do we convince policymakers at our local level that EVs are not the primary solution and may create other problems? And then linked to that, which is open to everyone, and everyone may have an opinion on that first question as well, how do we best manage the transition? Are EVs a solution or a stopgap?
Good call, good point. Okay, Nick. Your microphone's off, Nick.
It's very, very interesting, because they're very tempting. You think, this is obviously the solution. But actually, I think there are a problem. So for policymakers, I think we have to think more strategically about this, actually. And we need to think about, actually, why do you do any movement at all? What is it you're going to do that is causing this journey? And then I think where politicians and planners and that level of the community can actually start to think about, well, where are these things that people are going to? And how many of those things can we figure out how to bring them nearer? And how many things can we organise that the journey goes in the opposite direction, you bring things to people and so on, and that you can organise through other means. And I think these kind of questions are really important, and that's why the neighbourhood thing is so important, because if you go back, decades, pretty much most of these kind of neighbourhood-sized communities would have had a corner shop, and that corner shop would have been a bit like open all hours. There would have been, you could get almost anything there. And so a lot of those very, very sort of daily kinds of journeys would have been on foot, because it's just there. Then they were moved out because of supermarkets and so on, and then you got into the habit of the big weekly shop and so on. So it became impossible to do that on foot, because you would trying to carry too many things. And as I think it was Carolyn said earlier, that the issue of how much you can get on a bike and how much you can carry in a shopping bag and a trolley and things like that, that becomes an issue. So I think the policymakers, the message really is think about your policy and how your policy is actually affecting the amount of journeys and the distance that people are having to go on those journeys. And then you can start to think about how you actually improve the methods of making it. And the electric vehicle is, although in some ways it is better than a fossil fuel vehicle, actually it isn't really a lot better. And we do need to think about the basis of the journeys that we're making in the first place. And if we can get the politicians to start thinking about that, I think we can reduce the need for any journey at all, or any long journey, any motorised journey at all, sorry, then you begin to resolve the problem.
Great. And does anybody else want to answer on that, or are we going to move to the second part of the question that Tom fielded? That sounds.
I just add that yes, that electric vehicles are a bit like diesel. We were told 10 years ago that diesel was the answer, and it turned out that it's not. That it wasn't, and it's been a huge source of the problem. And so Nick's right. There needs to be a more strategic view, but that means really facing up to the public about what climate change really means and the changes that are needed to be made if we really take this seriously as an emergency. And that needs sort of huge political will and communication as to the changes that are needed across society.
I think if I could just add to that, I think it's absolutely right. Just add to that, the last climate change of the kind of dimension that we are heading into was a few thousand years ago, when it resulted in the desertification, if you like, across the Sahara Desert, right the way across India through the Middle East into China. Those deserts, that if you imagine there's a whole belt of deserts going across that thing, that all happened because of climate change, the last time of this kind of magnitude. That caused populations to migrate out of Africa into, eventually into Europe and so on. Now, that's the kind of scale that we're talking about. This isn't just about something is getting a bit warmer, or we can grow wine in Sussex. This is massive. And I think,
well, David Attenborough suggests it could be even worse than that.
Sure,
that's the least. It all depends how rapidly we start to reduce the carbon emissions. So it's all a matter of degree. But it could be, as you say, Nick, it could be a whole lot worse than that.
Now, I'm very conscious that the debate in terms of the issue of climate change is a global one. But what we want to do now is try and rein this into Brent. What can we do locally? And I do think that I love that slide on the neighbourhood planning that you had, Nick. I think that's really food for thought. That if we have a village concept and we have that, what are we doing in our village to contribute? Because the village ultimately, the multiple of villages make up the borough. And so if we create those good habits. Now, I know that there are some challenges in and around that. And Tom, I believe you fielded some of those from the Q&A. Do you want to share that with the group?
Yeah, so there are increasing numbers of questions coming through about Brent, which I appreciate. It might be difficult for some of the intricacies of some of the panel to answer. So it's more about, I suppose, your experience, if you've had experience in Brent. So certainly Vieve, Carolyn and Mark may well have done. So I've kind of grouped it together as best I can as a theme. So as best we can, the first one is how do we make cycling safer in Brent? How do we improve the infrastructure so that people are more likely to use cycles, use bikes or walk? And how do we best separate out the infrastructure of cars and cyclists? If anyone has any views on that at a local level, drawing on your experiences.
Let's start with you, Carolyn.
Well, I think it's important that, TfL carry out the commitments that they've made in terms of expanding and increasing the cycling network, and we need those networks to be joined up because, people they'll use the segregated infrastructure if it gets them to where they want to go to, but then if it throws them out into the traffic and they don't feel confident, then, that's not working. So, boroughs need to work closely together. We need, I think the infrastructure is really important, but as Vieve said, the soft measures, the cycle training is really important. I don't know what it's like in Brent, but my experience is that in most places cycle training is not promoted enough, even though it's offered and there's free cycle training in each council. People often don't know about that. The emphasis tends to be on training children in schools. But actually, if their parents can't ride, then that's probably not going to go anywhere. So adult cycle training is really important. And I know that, through Joyriders and the part of the cycling network we've got here in East London, it's the fact that you've got women who are trained as instructors and they can actually train their peers. People are more likely to have a lesson with somebody that they know. So it just makes it much easier to kind of recruit people, because booking a cycling lesson as an adult, that's quite a daunting thing to do. You're sort of going outside of your comfort zone. So I think it's the balance between improving the infrastructure and putting the soft measures in place as well.
I noted that again from Nick's presentation, the word mobility was an important word. I, like probably most of you, have seen the growth of all these electric scooters, the ones that you stand on. And is that a solution? Is that something that we should be considering? Have you seen them? I mean, the laws around them seem to be very vague. Are you allowed on the road? Is this on the pavement? Do they get in the way of cyclists? Don't they? Is it something we should be encouraging? Because again, it's not a car. These are the realities, and in Brent there are lots of them. I don't know who wants to answer that.
I'm happy. I'll field that one if you like.
Yes, please.
There's lots of them everywhere, and in essence, I think they're going to become quite a normal thing to see. They will be legalised. I would expect in the fullness of time that they would have the same rules that apply to bicycles. That's what I would expect to see. At the moment, of course, they are illegal. But the biggest issue really in my personal opinion, with the electric scooters is, whilst they provide mobility, they're sedentary. They're a sedentary form of transport, just like a car is. So, they're not particularly, they don't, I'm more than happy to see people on them, but I don't think they offer you can't carry as much on them, they are not, you're not getting any exercise on them. Whilst I think we'll see lots of them, and they will be legalised, I don't think they're a replacement for a car, and you can't sell them as such.
Right, that's a very interesting point. And Mark,
Michael, what I'd mentioned, he's actually, nobody's mentioned so far, but one really great solution are electric bikes, because that is halfway between, as Vieve said, you still got to cycle them, and I'm sure everyone's seen them, the Lime bikes, that they were green, now the red ones, the Uber bikes is the main scheme, but there's other schemes as well. But that you've got to cycle them, but the electric really makes a huge difference, because it means it's a lot easier to carry stuff. If you're feeling a bit tired, then it does the work for you. So that can go a really long way. And I don't know about Sadiq Khan, but some of the other candidates for the mayor were promising to replace the Santander bikes with electric bikes, because those Santander bikes, they're really heavy. They're not much fun to ride them. But if you try one of the Lime bikes, the red ones, they're fun to ride. You can carry stuff, you can go up a hill easily. But I think as part of the earlier question, the real deterrent to cycling, as Vieve highlighted, is the cycle danger. I mean, I love cycling, but the thing that I always feel most intimidated by are other vehicles, and particularly private cars, and the problem of speeding, which again tends to be worse for SUVs because they just drive through the speed bumps. So one really quick solution, or should be quick, would be to move as many roads as possible to 20 miles per hour, and really try and enforce this speeding, more traffic cameras, because that's what I fear most when I'm cycling, is somebody coming towards me at high speed, not slowing down, combined with and also segregated cycle lanes. But that's harder.
Yeah, Vieve, you want to say something?
If I can respond to that. So I agree with you entirely, Mark, in regard to traffic speed and everything along those lines. But a couple of things that I would say about safety. I mentioned during my talk that 80% of cyclists do not ride in the safe position on the road. That's because they've never been trained. If you are trained and you can gain confidence, you will find as a cyclist that you can be in far more control of every single traffic situation than you ever thought you could. But it does require training, and it does require gaining confidence doing it. Okay, so, and it's hard to explain sort of just talking, but I've shown many people this, and most cycling instructors have, including Carolyn, I'm sure. And segregation is not as good or as safe as people think. When you're in a segregated cycle lane, you are not in the vision of a driver. So every single time you cross a driveway or a side road, you on the bike have to look in 3 different places to make sure that a car who hasn't seen you isn't going to crash into you, because they're not looking where you are. Drivers have tunnel vision, and the faster they're going, the more tunnel vision they are. And they're looking for other motor vehicles. They are not looking for pedestrians. They are not looking for bike riders. So if you're over there on the segregated cycle path, they're not looking at you, right? So it's a false sense of safety. It's great in many respects, but lots and lots of accidents, in fact, I think most accidents happen at intersections when they haven't seen you. And the first thing they say is, "Sorry, mate, I didn't see you."
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Vieve. Right, leading on from Mark's point, and I'm going to put this to Nick. One of the things that came across, again, I'm back to that, the human being. We need to get people out of cars. But for people in cars, they hear you say reduce the speed to 20 miles an hour. Again, there's the mindset that they think they're being penalised, that they're being punished. Car drivers are being punished by asking to slow down, which of course is not the case. But again, this holdback area that we're dealing with. Nick, do you want to comment on that? I'm not quite sure where I'm leading you with that, but I think you get a sentiment of what I'm saying.
That's always dangerous. You never know where we'll end up. Okay, well, I think actually one of the problems with speed limits in general, but actually as you get into the lower speed limits, and I'm totally supportive of 20 mile an hour speed limits. So I think the trouble is that we put up a sign that says 20 miles an hour, and that does it. But actually, anybody doing anything, the stimuli that you're receiving from the environment is multisensory. So you see the 20 mile an hour signal, but that actually is just a piece of information, along with all the other pieces of information that you see. What you actually have to do to make the 20 mile an hour limit, or any other limit, but 20 mile an hour limit credible to you, and therefore something which you instinctively follow, is you have to do other things. You have to deliver the sense that 20 miles an hour is the right speed. And that comes from all the kind of feedback that comes along driving on, how far apart are the light columns? How far apart? How wide is the road? What's the sort of visual, what we call the useful field of view? How does that play on the street? And if the stimuli that's coming into there tell you that you should be, that 20 miles an hour is the right speed, you will go at 20 miles an hour. And so we have to think about designing for what we call the pre-conscious. So this is actually talking to the brain. I can give you here's a little factoid for you, right? The capacity of the human brain to process information is just over 11 million bits per second, and which is a lot. And the capacity of the human brain to work with conscious information, that's the information you kind of know about, is 80 bits per second. So it doesn't matter what they are, it's the big, huge number and a little tiny number. So when you're designing things like speed limits, there's no use talking to the conscious bit. You have to talk to the pre-conscious bit. And that means you've got to recognize that the eye is looking for a rhythm, and it will try to make that rhythm work. And we've got quite a lot of evidence that says that you respond to a kind of 4 or 5 second interval.
Fascinating.
And we can change the speed of people walking by moving vertical lines. Right? We can just make them go faster if they're further apart, or slower if they're closer together. And that means that a person walking at about, roughly speaking, let's keep the numbers easy, a meter a second, something like that. That's every 5 or 6 meters you will have a vertical line, and they will walk at 1 meter per second. Now, the same thing happens to a car driver because they're the same human being, right? But they're going 10 times the speed.
Yeah.
So therefore, you put things far apart. Instead of being 4 or 5 meters, you'd be 40 or 50 meters. And so if you want them to go at 20 meters, you need that kind of vertical line to be a little bit more often. And so that instinctive pre-conscious thing of actually fitting that signal in every 4 or 5 seconds gets you to 20 miles an hour.
Right.
And then you can start to do it. So you've got to have the kind of complete piece. You've got to have the sign, you've got to have the visual stimuli, the sound stimuli, what does the road sound like? All of these things need to fit the 20 mile an hour speed limit that you want.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's fascinating that when we have a look at how deep the issue is, that these are contributing factors. There are things that people would never have thought about. Those linkages to our cognition are really, really, really important. Okay, we have 4 minutes left. Tom, are there any more questions before? I know we're going to ask people to take the survey again based on the fact of what they've heard in the seminar.
Yeah, there's still lots of questions coming through. So I think what we will do is we will bundle them up and take them away and send it as a package to everyone after the meeting, and try and get input from the speakers to get their view on issues as best we can as well. Because, as I say, in 4 minutes, there's still lots of questions coming through, which is really good. But we're probably going to struggle to get through them all.
Okay, well
that's
then,
okay.
Shall we? Do you want to reissue the survey now?
Yes, so the survey's live. So if you haven't done it already, please do fill it in now. There's been a drop-off of people voting this time. There's about 40 people voting last time. There's 15 this time.
Okay,
so
no problem.
If
so
you haven't,
percentage weighting will change. Yeah.
So I'll give it 30 seconds because I know there's a little bit of a lag on the on the live stream.
So the rest of the questions we will deal with in another forum, because we're now marching towards. Is there anything? Is there a closing question that I can circulate to all 4 of our guests?
Yes, there is a. If you give me just a sec, I'll put a final slide up.
Yeah.
Oops. Okay, I hope people can see that. So
we can.
Yeah. So obviously, just thanks from the council officers for everyone who's tuned in and taken part today in the interactive session. So the next steps, I guess, just to think about is obviously you've had loads of information, loads of practical tips from the speakers, which has been brilliant. We've got an environmental network, which we'll provide in the chat, but I think as we're wrapping up, I'll send that round. Is part of the bundle we're going to send to people afterwards. Please look out for future webinars on all things climate change. We're going to be doing more, and hopefully we'll have less technical issues next time. As I say, there's lots of materials from the speakers, which we'll bundle up, and please do share it with anyone you think will be interested.
The presentations will be shared, will they?
Yes, as long as the speakers are okay with that. Yeah, which I'm sure they will. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, let me just finalise by going round the table and saying, okay, give us your one or two takeaways from today. So we'll go in reverse order this time. So Vieve, you first.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Really and truly, I think the best thing that anyone can do is actually to start doing it. Don't sit back and wonder, what it's like. Actually give it a go. Get out of your car, get on a bike and walk, or walk instead. And just discover how many people you run into, what new experiences you have. You quite honestly, I expect most people would be amazed at the things they discover.
And you can also buddy up to do that.
Absolutely.
Because that makes, that's the encouragement. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, please, Mark.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I mean, my number one recommendation would be getting an electric bike. That solves a lot of the problems. You can get around really quick. It's not too much effort. And it gets you out of the car. So that would be my tip.
No problem. Carolyn?
Bearing in mind that it's quite an expensive outlay, an electric bike. So I don't know what there is available in Brent in terms of cycle hire schemes. If there isn't one already, there should be one so that people can hire bikes from the council for free. We certainly have that in Waltham Forest. And that's a great opportunity, for people to give that a try. Obviously, they can join a Joyride for women, but there'll be other, I expect Brent Cycle Campaign probably leads led rides for men and women. So I would definitely give that a go. Book yourself some cycle training if you're not confident. You can book cycling for your whole training for your whole family, and also find out what local walking groups there are. Have a look at your local Living Streets campaign. There may be other walking buddies out there, and have a think about which trips you can potentially do using public transport, and put pressure on your local politicians to get the changes that you want to see.
Okay, thank you. And Nick?
Yeah, I would certainly pick up that last point. I'd agree with all of them, but I think that last point is actually really important. If the politicians don't get the push from the people, they're not going to push. So I think that's a really, really important point. I would actually say something a little bit. I would say get to know your neighbour. Start to become local. And then you find actually you chat with them, you walk down the road with them, and so on like that. I think start to realise that you are in a neighbourhood. You can make the neighbourhood is the people, and you're in it. Make the best of it, and then you'll find that these things, all of these things we've been talking about, become a lot easier and become kind of normal.
Okay. Well, listen, it's been fascinating. I would just like to say to the public, we will get, I'm sure Tom offline will get around to your questions and we'll see how they can get answered, because we understand that there are many questions that we did not get to answer, but it just shows that everybody is aware, everybody's starting to play their part. Talk to your neighbours, tell them we've got another 4 seminars to come. Hopefully we'll get over the technical issues. But for now, I'd like to thank Nick, Carolyn, Vieve and Mark, and of course Councillor Krupa and everybody else who shared this space. I'm Mike Adams of the Jason Roberts Foundation and the Cultural Media Centre. It's been a pleasure. We look forward to communicating with you again in the very near future. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much.